record now, and since this is your video, you can start us off.
All right. Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe. Here with me is my co-host for this set of videos, Jasper Lane. Oh, wait, the immaculate Jasper Lane.
I knew you'd get it eventually, and it's a pleasure to be here with you as always. Now, as much as I would love to introduce who we're going to be talking about, I think the thumbnail and title gave it away, but still, I'll give the pleasure to you.
We're discussing uh, the most cold-blooded son of a... we're discussing the coldest dude imaginable during this era, Otto Hightower.
And this is a video I've been looking forward to because I think this might be the most contentious character between you and I.
Really?
You see,
Okay, I got to hear what you got to say about this.
I don't want to say I'm more sympathetic to Otto, but it's like I don't look at him as the worst human being like so many people seem to look at him as.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating. Elaborate. Why is that?
So, I think there is kind of like a lot of aspects into this, but for me, like, and don't get me wrong, Otto Hightower, by our standards, by my own moral standards, is a pretty terrible human being. But in Westeros, I don't think he's that bad, all things considered.
True.
So that's just kind of like how I'm judging him. And obviously, there's a lot of terrible people in Westeros that we've been introduced to. I mean, Tywin's worse than him, Joffrey, Ramsay.
True.
And
I was judging him by the standards of the era of the dance and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Not by like I don't know. For me, at least, I try to compartmentalize him away from the Game of Thrones era and from Aegon's era. So like I try to view each of the characters in the context of their situation.
Mm-hmm. But I guess I'm sympathetic to him in a way. Not sympathetic, I don't know. Like I this is definitely not the biggest hill I'm willing to die on. I'm definitely willing to come down a little bit. But I can like see the actions that he's taken, and I don't think all of them are as evilly motivated as some people say.
Okay, I'll say this. In the book, the nature of his quest for power is probably a little sleazier in a way, or at least he's less sympathetic.
Mm-hmm.
By all means, he's less sympathetic. And the reason I say that is just we got to bear in mind he does go after Rhaenyra when like he's politicking. Yeah, he's initially kind of in her camp. Then when Aegon's born, he's very much in favor of essentially all but discarding her.
Mm-hmm.
And Rhaenyra, at least in the book, her political campaign against the Greens is an act of self-defense because the Greens are pretty much striking first.
Yes.
They're the aggressor. Now, that being said, in the context of the TV series, the two sides are reacting to each other because they're dunces. But that said, I'll actually come in support of your stance. Like when you compare him to others throughout all of Westeros' history, like Joffrey, Ramsay, heck, the trouble. Okay, I hope people don't mind me saying this, but Westeros as a world is a world with no moral code. Really, there isn't really too many characters with any kind of morality whatsoever, as we understand it. Now, I'm just gonna say, like in the West, our morality was essentially to an extent defined by the first Western civilizations, such as the Hottians or Hittites of the Bronze Age, the Egyptians, and the Greeks, and of course you have Aristotle and Plato, who wrote great tomes on ethics and philosophy, along with other great thinkers. So Western ethics and philosophy are derived from these great thinkers and even these great civilizations that, are the ancestors of Rome. And through Rome, they were able to convey throughout all the West their moral codes and ideas on morality and ethics. So that the West in general has a certain set of moral ideas. The East, it comes down from Buddha, Confucius, and in regards to Japan, you have Bushido, which was essentially forged over the course of several centuries, but primarily through kind of the examples of the Taira and the Minamoto clans that preceded, and later the Ashikaga, that preceded the copying down of Bushido, the moral code of Japan. So I'm just saying that in general. Now, in Westeros, there's no code of chivalry. Yeah, we get characters saying, well, this is chivalrous, this would not be. But it's not chivalry as we understand it exactly, because the code of chivalry is an actual code of conduct. There are things that men were allowed to do and not allowed to do by that code to an extent. Now, I'm not saying that everybody properly upheld it historically, but it was generally an ideal around which men tried to aspire to. That being said, Westeros has a much more brutal it's a much more brutal kind of world than the actual history to an extent was at various points. There are times when actual history did get pretty brutal like that, but Westeros has, like, you look at Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon, these are pretty clear-cut good guys for the most part. They're pretty ethical.
Yeah,
but
I
but
would argue a bit on Robert. Let's not forget that he was the one who wanted to assassinate a little girl.
fair, but then he called it off.
After he was dying, he wouldn't have to deal with it afterwards.
But at the same time, Robert was a man who, with deep loyalties, and who, let's bear in mind, he did try to do the right thing at various points. So, yeah, he bends and flexes his morality where he shouldn't, but he overall is a much more moral guy than almost any other character in that series. So I'm just saying that morality in the real world is a complex notion, and that your society and your background kind of define your morals and your ideals.
Mm-hmm.
In Westeros, there's also the literature of your civilization that defines your morality, because literature is just a vehicle through which a society expresses its ideals and its ethics to an extent. And Westeros doesn't really seem to have too much of a literature.
I mean, I would say that obviously there is some literature, but like I think a lot of like the morals that we get from Westeros are obviously heavily inspired by roughly kind of the medieval writings and timing. I've obviously War of the Roses is probably one of the key components and biggest inspirations for the setting of Westeros, as well as it being a very similar culture to that of medieval Europe.
Well, I'd argue it's more similar to probably late 15th century England rather than Europe. That being said, with Westeros, there are times when it sinks to deeper depravities than even the Wars of the Roses did.
Oh yeah, that is true. George R. R. Martin definitely, when he was writing his series, like a lot of people think that medieval times were very, very like, and by standards, it was extensively like very worse back then in a multitude of ways, but it wasn't quite the whole bloodthirsty killing and mutilation where all the soldiers were just pillaging and raping as they go. It wasn't quite that bad. There are incidents of that taking place, but obviously I don't even think that was the norm. It's kind of like how George has a lot of like child marriages, whereas historically there were child marriages, but the average I think was like 18.
Well, sort of. You would sometimes, some men would end up marrying a 12-year-old, for example, but they were made by the church to wait till the girl was 16 to 17. till she reached her majority to consummate the marriage.
Yes, not to
And
mention, you'd obviously want to wait that long just for scientific reasons.
yeah, and they knew it. That said, I could think of one war which got bloodthirsty like this, but uh, the people of the times rejected the war and felt it to be too violent, and that was the Scottish Wars of Independence. But that was just Edward the First and Edward the Second, who are well known for being the most depraved, to an extent, and violent of the kings. And
Was that Longshanks? Am I thinking of the right one?
Longshanks, yep.
Okay, good. Thank you, Braveheart.
But the thing is, like, the actual historic record was way worse than what Braveheart shows.
All right. With that, I think we're getting a little off topic. We got to remember this is about Otto Hightower.
That said, um, Westeros at times gets worse, at times doesn't. So it's it does. But the thing about Westeros is, by and large, it does not have the kind of moral codes that define medieval Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And medieval Europe was a weird dichotomy of various codes of chivalry, various codes of conduct, um, and just a number of do's and don'ts. For example, um, uh, you could not unsheathe steel in the king's presence. If you did, that was pretty much automatic execution because you are blaspheming. You just don't do that. So, and no one would think of doing that. You would never, like, no woman, man, woman, or child would think of pretty much almost pulling out a dagger. It's not till the pre-modern era when, kings' heads began to roll. But that's a different kind of world to an extent from medieval Europe. And because of medieval Europe, the king was God on earth. And at least after the Pope, of course. But Otto Hightower, as far as his character goes in the show, ethically, he's well within his bounds to try to defend his daughter and his grandchildren, because clearly Rhaenyra and Daemon are going to want their heads. On the other hand, Otto forces his daughter into Viserys' bed. So in that regard, he does kind of start the conflict. Mm-hmm. Because I'm going to argue just real quick. The thing is, by pushing Alicent towards Viserys the way he does, this threatens to an extent long-term the position of Rhaenyra. What it also does is position him clearly against the Velaryons. And what it further does is he is the aggressor, but on the other hand, he is clearly full of hatred for Daemon. But the trouble is, Daemon at no point tries to compromise or behave himself in regards to Otto. And I know people are going to say, well, Otto has somehow possessed Viserys and whatnot. Yeah, I'm sure. He shakes his booty for Viserys every couple of nights. And Viserys is entranced. I'm being sardonic here. But here's the thing. Viserys inherited Otto from Jaehaerys. And the difference between Jaehaerys and Viserys is that Viserys was able to say, okay, you know what? Go away a few times. Like, you're fired. And yeah, Viserys always comes back to Otto, but we have to bear in mind, Jaehaerys left the entirety of the governing of the realm in Otto's hands for a number of years. This is a problem Viserys kind of inherited. And on the other hand, Daemon, at a few points, both in show and book, or books, considering there's two of them that have, or three technically, that have Daemon in them, Daemon is just someone who flagrantly plays at being the defiant, misbehaving second prince. Now, once again, I'll actually refer to European history. it's all like there's so many periods and kings that had to struggle with a second or third brother, and it's just Daemon is falling into that trap. And the thing is, much as we have to look at it in the context of Otto and Daemon struggling against each other, it's also Daemon and Viserys who are squabbling. And the thing is, Daemon often will create a mess, then come running crying back to his brother to clean it up. And Viserys has to, of course, play the responsible brother and clean up the mess. But the trouble is, Otto's essentially the messenger at times. And Daemon doesn't like having a messenger between him and his brother. And you have, on Otto's end, he's very ambitious and greedy. Daemon sees this. Viserys doesn't, to an extent. So Viserys is blind to the truth. That being said, Daemon is also bitter and envious over the fact that I should be Hand of the King. A position which, I mean, no offense, but Daemon is so unfit for. He'd have the realm at war within a week. And when he does end up the hand of Rhaenyra, for all intents and purposes, he gets the realm in a war. Like, yeah, I know the Greens drew first blood, but at no point does Daemon even consider some means of de-escalation or something. Like, so I got a weird position about Otto. With the book, I'm actually like, okay, you know what? No, no, no. There can be no negotiations with him. But in the show, I guess it kind of softened him a little.
Mm-hmm. And again, Otto Hightower in the books is one of the reasons why I do not subscribe to the idea that House or Fire and Blood was written by the perspective of a green loyalist. I fervently disagree about that, and it's characters like Otto in the books that make me wholeheartedly dislike the Greens. I mean, with the exception of one or two characters. In regards to Otto in the show, though, there was just this aspect of him, clearly, he had one of the best lines in the show, and I believe it was, "The gods have yet to create a man who who has no interest in absolute power," or something along those lines.
Oh yeah, that's a funny statement, but I'm actually going to disagree with it. Historically, there are countless men who are not interested in absolute power, which is kind of funny. But and quite a few men, weirdly, who actually wielded it well.
Mm.
Okay. Actually, I know.
I found it. "The gods have yet to make a man who lacks the patience for absolute power, Your Grace."
I still disagree with this statement,
mm-hmm.
both in the historic context, but also in regards to the show. Funny enough, I don't think Viserys is much interested in power.
Well, it's because he has it.
Yeah, he doesn't want it.
I don't know if I would go that far. I don't think I would say he doesn't want it.
I actually don't think he really wants it to an extent.
I think if you were to give him a piece of paper saying, "Hey, you don't have to be king, hand it over to someone else," he wouldn't sign it.
No, I think he sees it as an obligation and duty. Like, he doesn't want it, but it's his duty. It's his responsibility. So he goes through with it. So that's why he wouldn't sign it. It's because he has an obligation.
I think, well, we got to remember, this is all about Otto. So I do disagree with that on Viserys, but sticking with Otto. So one of the reasons why I am more sympathetic to him in the show is because he's ambitious, clearly, but his ambition is... He's a bit conniving, but there's not...
A bit?
I mean, everyone has to do a little bit of conniving when they want to get their ambition, but it's not like the real, slitting throats. It's not Peter Baelish levels of bullshittery, you know?
Yeah, fair.
It's he's lawful evil.
Yeah. Yeah.
He follows the rules. He's not doing anything, outrageously, terrible. He's just doing, and he does a good job in pointing out why his method would be the best.
True. That said, he is partially the villain.
Oh yeah, definitely a very antagonistic character. I think I know how to best describe Otto. He's the smartest guy in the room who can't seem to understand why no one sees why he's the smartest guy in the room.
Yeah, he's the most arrogant.
It's like he's right, and he's right. But the issue is, if no one else or if a lot of people in the room don't think you're right, then technically you're kind of wrong. He truly, I think he really does believe that what's best for the realm is for Viserys to keep the tradition of having the eldest son inherit. I really do think he believes that. I think that I think obviously there is some general selfish ambition, but I do think he truly believes that's the best way to go. And I think given the circumstances, especially like how Rhaenyra is, he's right. But the issue is a lot of people don't think he's right, and because of that, he's wrong.
To an extent, yeah. I think though that okay, I'll just say real quick regarding the perspective of Fire and Blood, as like on which side it falls on. I think that now you said you disagree with Preston Jacobs, I think it is, who suggests that it was written by a pro-green source. I'm actually going to argue that it's a source that's pro-black and pro-green in a way, but in the context that we have to bear in mind, Aegon the Third and Viserys the Second one, so the lineage of Daemon, but they have a vested interest in siding with the Greens, in that proscribing Rhaenyra out of the inheritance. So in that regard, they favor Aegon to an extent. But on the other hand, they are descendants of the Blacks, so they're kind of also on the black side. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They're on the black side, but they are not on Rhaenyra's side. So, like, I don't know if that makes any sense. Like, I hope I'm making some sense. So they're probably pro-black, but they're not pro-Rhaenyra. So that there's a differentiation to be made to an extent. So they'd be pro, maybe not her three initial kids, but they're pro Daemon's kids. They're not pro Daemon or pro Otto, for example, but they are pro Daemon's sons because Daemon's sons won the war. So in that regard, it's not exactly greens, but it's not exactly black. It's something in the middle to an extent.
Well, shit, but if only the greens were gray, that would have sounded amazing. Oh, no, wait, no, I messed that up. They should have been the whites. It's not black, it's not white, it's something in the middle. Gray.
Yeah. Yeah. But my point is just that Gildane, the main guy compiling the sources in the books, is basically given the job of, okay, the Greens are right that a daughter cannot inherit, so we're taking that stance. But the legitimate heirs were not the Greens, but Rhaenyra's two youngest sons. So everybody else has to be blasted and condemned and mocked and, made to look monstrous. So it's kind of antagonistic as a source towards a lot of characters because it's taking, we got to delegitimize, in a way, everybody who is not Aegon the Third and Viserys the Second. And I know people may say that's a controversial statement, but at no point does Fire and Blood actually go out of its way to attack those two and criticize them too much.
It definitely goes out of its way to criticize Aegon the Third.
Well, a little, but not to the same extent that Aegon the Second and Rhaenyra get criticism.
You're right. I'm getting my Aegons mixed up. I was thinking of Aegon the Second.
Yeah. Now, the most it says about Aegon the Third is that he was brooding and he never much laughed and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, the way he's presented and the way Viserys II are presented, like you compare that with Otto, there's like the two are portrayed very radically different, and and that's where Otto. We also got to bear in mind how he's perceived by the time of like Tywin Lannister and whatnot. He's cited as a bad hand, so his reputation has not gone over very well in the past century and a half or so.
You're
Since
right, because it was a maester in training who said that to Davos.
okay, um, thank you. I had forgotten that, and
Well,
he's
I
cited.
say I say a maester in training. He was a maester who replaced the recently deceased guy in
Yeah,
Stannis' court.
well, so that's the stance that the Maesters have. Otto was a bad hand, and that's where okay, but he. This might sound weird, but administratively, he actually has a pretty good track record.
I mean, of course, you would expect someone who was appointed by Jaehaerys the Old to be good at their job. Say what you will about Jaehaerys when it comes to parenting, but administration, he was second to none. Except for that one time he made his Lord Commander hand, but that lasted like a year.
Yeah, and Otto ran things really well. Now, he was already politicking with Alicent and whatnot when Jaehaerys was really old. He was clearly politicking, but everybody else is doing it too, so he's got to be cool.
Yeah.
Um,
So I guess that's kind of like my take on him. It's like he's guilty of things that everyone's kind of doing. He's just better at it.
that said, I'm just going to make the argument that, however, in the book where he's scummy is when he starts to campaign against Rhaenyra, and that's where I just take the stance. She's still a little girl. Like basically, he's showing you that he did lack ethics in a way that you know what I mean. Like uh, that's still pretty reprehensible, and we should not make excuses for. So, in that regard, he's pretty reprehensible as a human being. That said, he's not Tywin Lannister.
No, not
With
at all.
Tywin, with Tywin as hand, Rhaenyra would never have made it to 11 years old. Um, I'm just being honest.
I think
Tywin is blood.
I think you're underestimating Tywin. I think he would have somehow killed her before she was born.
Yeah, true. Uh, Tywin is bloodthirsty. Like I know people don't like this comparison, but Joffrey and Tywin have a lot in common. Just
Joffrey,
in the amount
yeah, I
of
mean,
bloodthirst.
Joffrey lacks the intelligence to apply his ruthlessness. You know what? No, no, no. I'm actually going to clap back on you a little bit about that. Joffrey and Tywin, the only thing they have in common is hair. Or, no, Tywin's bald. They don't even have that.
Well, I just mean he can be pretty ruthless and bloodthirsty in his own way,
That's
and
the thing.
needlessly.
I mean, we're talking about every character except Otto, but in the case of Tywin, I don't think he's bloodthirsty, but he's ruthless. I don't think he does the things he does because he enjoys it. I think he just does it because it's the most effective thing to do.
I tend to think that it's the Tywin always takes the easy way out in a way,
Yeah.
um, but that's a separate video. Otto doesn't always try to dispense with all of his enemies immediately. He does try to be patient and observe the situation. There's something very patient about him. And so, towards the end of season one, he's pretty much well established in his position and is essentially regent. But he's now. I'm actually gonna uh, be honest. He doesn't seem to pay much attention to. There's a quality I will say is a bit like Tyler. He's not paying attention to what his daughter or his grandchildren are up to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very fascinating part of Otto because he's clearly got his eyes on everyone else, but he's not really paying attention to his own family. He's just assuming that they're all on the same page.
When, yeah, I think it's just kind of like he's kind of, as Hand of the King, he's used to having this power and influence, and he expects those of him, like specifically his daughters and his blood, to be on his side. Where in the books they clearly are to a great extent. In the show, there's a little bit of kind of shenaniganry, specifically between him and his daughter.
Yeah, I was going to say that. That said, he seems to be fairly close to Alicent. I was just thinking that there's Aegon, there's Aemond, that, and even Kristen Cole to an extent, that he's kind of not paying attention to some of the nonsense they're up to and the trouble they're getting into. Like you got Aegon, who's fathering illegitimate children and whatnot, and doing all sorts of dumb stuff. Clearly, he's not paying attention to that when he probably should. There's Aemond, who's clearly, at least in the context of the book, completely off his rocker and is kind of scary, yet Otto doesn't seem to notice. And this is something I will say I think is probably in common between book and show to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
So, which one do you prefer more?
I mean, obviously, I prefer the show because he's just a more interesting and somewhat sympathetic character. As much as I'll kind of defend Otto for not being as bad as everyone says he is, he's still very much kind of like the antagonistic force and arguably the main reason that the dance happens. Though I give him some leeway because we've talked about this before, but the dance was somewhat inevitable. Even if, Viserys married the Velaryon daughter, chances are there would still be a dance.
Yeah, except it would be between I'm just going to say this. Weirdly, it'd be between Corlys and Rhaenyra to an extent.
Yeah, what do you think their team would be? It would be like the Blacks and the Turquoise? The Blues? The Turquoises? There's got to be a better way to say turquoise.
Yeah, fair. Probably the Blues and the Blacks. And everybody would be black and blue afterwards.
Oh, you beat me to it, you bastard.
So, as for me, I don't know. Like, you made a really good argument for show Otto. The acting is really good with him.
Oh, it's I think it's Chris Evans who plays Voldemort. He's so good.
I like him from other roles. I didn't even know he did Voldilocks.
Who?
Voldilocks. That's always been my nickname for Voldemort.
Oh, okay.
I always kind of found him a bit of a joke of a villain. I'm a big fan of Voldemort as a character. I always found him kind of funny.
Hey,
and so I called him Voldilocks just to make fun of him.
Gotcha. But hey, changing the subject slightly, I looked up turquoise synonyms. Apparently, sea green is another word for turquoise, so it could still be the blacks and the greens.
Or the blacks and the blues.
Definitely think blacks and the blues rolls off the tongue a bit better. Chris Evans, it's just unlucky to have been kind of paired with Matt Smith and
oh my gosh, this guy's played in Neverland James Hook, and in Anonymous Edward DeVere. Yeah, I really like a lot of this guy. Like, Anonymous is nowhere near accurate, but this guy is so good in it. Oh, Midsummer Dream. I remember that version. So he was Lysander? Ah, wow, this guy's... Wow. I'm just looking at his filmography up. This guy's he's one of my favorite actors.
And you never even knew.
Yeah, I just ended up watching some of his movies and just going, man, this guy's so good. He's so perfect. Every time I saw him, I'd always get excited and I'd go, wow, he's so good. And yet, now I'm going, wow, so that was his name. And he's Welsh.
I mean, arguably that's kind of the sign of an amazing actor when you don't know or recognize him in his other roles.
Well, I recognize him in his various roles. I always knew it was him, but I didn't know who he himself was. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if yeah, but wow, yeah. Well, the Welsh always make great actors.
Oh
I've
yeah,
noticed.
especially cannibalistic actors.
What?
Wasn't the actor for Hannibal Welsh?
Oh yeah, I think he was. I didn't even notice that. Well, there's also
Yeah,
uh,
Anthony
we also,
Hopkins.
we also make great
Welsh.
writers. Ken Follett. You have Catherine Zeta-Jones, who's a pretty good actress. You've got
Oh, no, no, no. You have to say it like this. Catherine Zeta-Jones.
oh yeah, yeah. But anyways, overall, Otto is played by a perfect actor,
Yes.
and he he's a really interesting character. Like regardless whether book or show. Now I'm actually going to say like we discussed his like going with Maester Conspiracy, how he signed up for it, so that with or without that theory, when you read it, the book, he's still interesting.
Mm-hmm.
With the show, just like on its own, he's still interesting. So this is a character that is no matter what pretty interesting. So yeah, definitely on the same page with you there.
Yeah, and as well as that kind of like sympathetic aspect to like I want to be very clear, slightly sympathetic
With the
aspect. I really do believe that he thinks his actions are for the best. He's just like his ambition and what he thinks is best happen to align more so than he probably would want to admit.
yeah. Now, with that said, I think it's time to wrap up this video.
Well, I think there is one more aspect we can go into, especially because we didn't touch about this too much, but the relationship between Otto and Alicent. I think
Is it really
that's
that important? I'm joking. Yeah, clearly in the show she adores her father, but is distressed by how he's um, maneuvering her
mm-hmm.
and how he's using her. And in turn, he's frustrated by her um, lack of desire, by her picking at her nails, and her general lackluster enthusiasm for his politics.
Yeah, I think what I find the most interesting about the relationship, a lot of people have said that the relationship between Otto and Alicent is fairly abusive. Obviously, not in a physical sense, but in an emotional sense. And I won't disagree with that, but I will say I do think there is a more caring side to Otto that really does want what's best for his daughter. It's just in his mind, what's best for her also coincides with his ambition in politics. Like I think with him, everything kind of lines up a little too perfectly. So I wonder if he justifies his ambition with his love or vice versa. Which it's hard to tell with him which one's the stronger motivation.
I do think you're right.
Because I mean, like, let's be honest. You're a father. You would want your daughter to marry the king because that's a prestigious position. You know she'll be taken care of. And Viserys in particular, he's a good guy on the old side, obviously, but he'll treat her well. Just so
Yeah,
happens that if she marries the king, you get a bit of a bonus in a lot of ways as well.
yeah, and you get a pay raise, so yeah, yeah. You don't have to pay for the wedding either. I'm joking though.
Especially if it's a red one.
Yeah, yeah. So
But maybe that's just me trying to find a more sympathetic outlook to the character as a whole. Like, not trying to justify his decisions and choices, but just
oh yes, you are.
painting it in the best light I possibly can. Because maybe I just find that a bit more interesting than power hungry diet Littlefinger.
Yeah, but he is Diet Littlefinger. I'm joking. I'm joking.
Uh,
Um, yeah, it is an interesting bond. I think it is certainly to an extent abusive. I know that's a weird outlook, but on the other hand, a lot of things with him coincide with what he wants
mm-hmm.
when it comes to her. And on the other hand, um,
it seems less so like it's still abusive, but it seems more on the part of neglection rather than any sort of malice from Otto.
Yeah, it's just that he never asks her
Mm-hmm. What she
what she wants.
wants.
Yeah, which weirdly, this might sound peculiar, but I think this is why she kind of grows to like Viserys. And I do think she does grow to like Viserys in a weird, as a bit of a substitute father, but also as a husband, because Viserys does ask her what she wants.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there's a huge age difference, but there's also genuine affection between Alicent and Viserys.
Yeah, I think there's this. There, like in another world, if Viserys was a couple decades younger, they could have been happy together. I think it was a lot like they had an emotional attachment, but
Weirdly,
not a
I
physical
might
one.
I might actually make a weird argument in the show. Even if he was that old, if he did not have Rhaenyra, I actually think the marriage would have gone without a hitch.
Maybe.
And they're like, I, I'm not trying to bash Rhaenyra. It's just that
I mean,
him.
we can both agree this is all Rhaenyra's fault. Clearly, she should have just never been born.
No, no, I'm not going that. But what I mean is, Viserys was so fixated on her being heiress that if it had not, like, if he did not get that in his head and push Rhaenyra like he did, weirdly, the relationship between him and Alicent probably never would have soured. And the thing is, Rhaenyra was raised with this expectation. If he never, if she never had that expectation, and he followed Westerosi custom, what would have happened would have probably been radically different. Aegon would have been different. Rhaenyra would have been different. And yet, I still think somehow there was genuine affection between king and queen. The only thing is that, in a way, his obsession with doing right by Rhaenyra and Emma got in the way of things, and that Rhaenyra then took advantage of that to an extent, but also this shaped the situation, shaped Rhaenyra, so that you can never have Aegon on the throne without Rhaenyra coming in like Stannis might to an
Mm-hmm.
extent. Like I'm not trying to. I'm just saying like coming in with fire and blood. And the thing is, Otto, um, to an extent, was right in that maybe we ought to go tradition, not Valyrian tradition, but Westerosi tradition here to as the path of least resistance. And yeah, there's his ambition, but it's like you said, he's kind of right. But the problem is because everybody disagrees with him in the room, that makes him kind of wrong as well. And clearly, his daughter did not fully initially want what he wanted for her, but we have to bear in mind that she did come around to it. She did she did basically fall in love with the king. And she did decide she wanted that. So that is her decision. So as much as he pushed it, he didn't need to push it very hard. You know what I mean? So in that regard, I have a hard time blaming him in regards to the marriage. Now, everything that came afterwards, pitting his daughter against Rhaenyra and whatnot, that I do think he pushed for that to an extent because he's thinking Westerosi tradition, not Valyrian tradition, which Valyrian tradition is really weird. And
And
I'm
we
just
don't have
saying,
a whole lot on that, but yeah, I see what you mean.
yeah. So I hope I'm making a intelligent argument here.
I mean, I at
Uh,
least understand it, so that's a good sign.
okay, good. Très bien. But the
Gesundheit.
merci, merci. But the thing is with Otto and Alicent, I just think that they do line up with each other pretty well. Like, here's the thing: he wanted her to get married to Viserys, so he said, "Spend time with him." He was not forcing his daughter all that forcefully into this. You know what I mean? He was, but he wasn't. Like,
Yeah,
and
I see what you mean, but then that gets into like the tricky topic of like force, quote unquote. Like
well,
we don't know how forceful this whole thing was cuz let's say she didn't. Let's say right then and there she said, "No, I don't want to." What would
Oh yeah,
have Otto done?
he would have scolded her and reprimanded her and whatnot. Yeah, I will agree with you. But on the other hand, after a while, she did go willingly to entertain Viserys.
One could say that's just making the best situation of kind of like the best
Back,
case of a terrible situation.
yeah, I do agree, but I'm also thinking, like after the marriage,
Mm-hmm.
her and her dad are very much on the same page. Actually, this might sound weird. I think she takes up the green cause in some ways more than Otto does.
I disagree that after the marriage, her and her dad are on the same page. I don't think it's roughly until Aemond loses her eye that she's
Is that
really full Team
well?
Green.
Yeah, I know. That's what I mean. Well, yeah, I do think that, but I'm just thinking, okay, that's what I didn't mean like immediately once she was married to Viserys, she was on Team Green. No, that's obviously false. But what I meant was gradually over time, she becomes more Team Green than her dad. And Aemon losing his eye is what firms her resolve.
Mm-hmm.
I just mean like in the conversations between, like the difference, okay, the difference is um, when it comes to her conversations with Kristen, like the two are whining about Rhaenyra, which you never really see Otto do that. Otto, like, I guess the difference is, okay, Alicent and Kristen, it's personal. It's not business. With Otto, it's nothing personal. It's just business.
Mm-hmm.
The only personal side is Daemon. He hates Daemon and fears Daemon. And Daemon gives him good reason to worry.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, in a way, Otto is rather like Don Corleone to an extent.
Very
In that,
practical.
yeah, he's very practical and he's trying to keep it professional between him and his political rivals. It's whereas Alicent is rather like Sonny Corleone. You know, everything is personal. Everything has to be tackled with in a personal manner to an extent after Aemon loses his eye. And the thing is, there can be no negotiations. And this is where I'm just saying Otto seems to think he's on the same side as her. He is, but she's more on green, Team Green, after Aemon loses his eye, after a while, like after the marriage, than even Otto is to an extent. And what I mean is that she's fanatically on that side. Like you look at how she decorates the entire palace with the symbol of the seven.
So I would disagree with her being more Team Green than Otto.
Well, to an extent, in a way. Like what I mean is, she just strikes me as more fanatical about it than
Nah, 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 nah,
Otto.
nah. Well, I mean, she's definitely more emotional than Otto. But the whole fact of the matter is, at the end, when Viserys dies and the plan is initiated, Otto is pretty gung ho about, all right, we need all them blacks dead.
Yeah.
Do not take that quote out of context. Do not take that out of context. But with that, he's ready to wipe out his political adversaries, whereas Alicent is still in the area of nah, 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 nah. Ain't no reason to start killing children and whatnot. So I think that Otto very much is more in support logistically with the Greens than Alicent is.
Well, to an extent, like Alicent is not willing to kill the children, but she is certainly prepared to kill the political rivals.
No, not even Rhaenyra. She thinks that peace can still be had, at least in the show.
Okay, if so, she was very naive.
Yes.
Uh, but on the other hand, I just see it as we got to bear in mind Otto does have that negotiation scene with Damon and
Oh,
Rhaenyra.
God, I blocked that out of my mind because it was so stupid.
He did, well, I'll actually say this. It was a dumb scene, but we have to take it at face value. He did expect that he could negotiate them down, like that he could talk them into submission.
But it was
which,
but it was mostly because Alicent was strong arming him because she got to Aegon first.
yeah,
And once Aegon like agreed with
okay,
Alicent, we never really see the scene between Aegon, Otto, and Alicent in that regard. But Alicent got to
okay,
Aegon first and wanted to proceed with peace and talked him into it. So he, at that point, is following Alicent and Aegon's wishes, not his own.
fair. So I get, well, to an extent. Okay, I'll actually amend my previous statement and just say the whole situation with Otto and Alicent is complicated in that the two kind of goad each other either towards peace or violence, depending on the situation. Like there are times when she's more gung ho for violence, times when he is, and in a way, they align perfectly with each other, but at times they're more fanatical than each other at different points. They, in some ways, I'm just saying, they're a toxic duo
To-
because,
toxic love.
yeah, in a way, because they just keep kind of pushing each other further and further. Like they're almost competing with each other. And this, in a way, it's a reflection of the Damon and Rhaenyra relationship where the two are competing with each other with how awful they can be. That said, what I think I also meant was that Alicent is very much aware of the problems within Team Green, like of Aegon, Aemon, and whatnot. And it just seems like, to an extent, Otto's disconnected from the team in a way. Like he thinks he's the head of the team, or like he's in control of it, when clearly isn't. What seems disconnected from the rest of Team Green.
Mm.
Like
So
it,
let
what it,
so hold on 1 second. So let's start again. 1, 2, 3, now.
it seems like Otto's kind of disconnected from the rest of Team Green. Like, um, the thing is, Allison seems, I do think, is more on Team Green in that she's more in touch with what, like, Team Green's goals shift and change with her. You know what I mean? Her and Kristen Cole are really at the helm of it throughout a good chunk of season one. Otto thinks he's at the helm. He's clearly the logistics guy. He's clearly the guy getting things done to a large extent. But just like you talk about, oh, well, Allison strong armed him into at least negotiating with, Rhaenyra and Damon. Otto clearly sabotaged that because he had no intention to make it work. But you see, the two are like Allison and Otto do feed into each other, but on the other hand, he he's totally disconnected in a way from Aegon, from Aemon, from Kristen, and yet he's on the same team.
He
So
he doesn't know what they want. He just assumes that it's going to line up with his final goals. Whereas in actuality, you can have the same goals, but the method that you all take to reach said goal can differ drastically.
yeah, and by the end of season one, I would argue that his position as essentially party leader, if you can call it a political party, has been usurped by Alicent, and arguably even to an extent by Aemon.
I don't know if we're there just yet, but I will, especially with my knowledge of the books, that is coming up
Yeah,
because it's
but,
only a matter of time given the
but
stronger personalities and positions that a prince and a queen will have over a hand.
yeah. Now, I do think by the end of season one, I do think Allison has basically usurped him as political party leader. And she might not be flexing her muscles with him because he's her daddy, but she's clearly in charge, from what I can see at the end of the season one.
I th-
And
I think the
I,
thing is, I wouldn't say she's in charge. Aegon is technically in charge, being the king,
well,
and I think
what I
she
mean,
just has her, for lack of a better term, claws digged into Aegon. It's very much a Cersei Joffrey situation.
I was not even talking about Aegon. I meant like before the coronation.
Oh, okay.
Like before the coronation, she's kind of in a position to be the party leader in a way. where Otto thinks he's still in charge. Like, you know what I mean?
I
Like,
I mean, I think he is still in charge. I think he still
uh,
holds most of the influence at court.
weirdly, I think he does, but he doesn't.
Fucking Frenches. Sorry. That makes no sense.
I think that he does hold enormous influence, but that we have to bear in mind formal influence is held more by Queen Dowager. And his influence runs through increasingly, well, I'm father of the Queen Dowager.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, there's also the fact that she's brought in the Seven. She's redecorated the castle in her vision of how the monarchy should be and whatnot. And yeah, that falls into the purview of the Queen to an extent. But the other thing is that he, uh, like the relationship in terms of ceremony and uh, the ceremonials do matter. So, for example, people would pay more homage to her than him in ceremony. And I think that subtly, she may not have intended to, but she's begun to accrue more and more of the influence and power to an extent towards her as mother of all these children of, well, children of by Viserys. On the other hand, he has had so much influence and whatnot for so long, you can't deny that he will have enormous backdoor power. That being said, he has kind of been allowing her, like, she has Kristen Cole, like a lot of the major green guys are also almost more in coordination with her and whatnot. Like the Lannisters discuss with her as much as they do him, like what should be done and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
The and so I think that Otto like does wield enormous power and influence, but he's been allowing her to be his partner in a way. But on the other hand, she's not trying to like usurp him, but she has in a way. And but there at the same time, we should not view the two as ever being in conflict with each other after Aemon loses his eye. Before that, there is a conflict because she's not wanting any conflict. And he wants a conflict to an extent.
Okay.
That being said, after the loss of the eye, she does at various points consider negotiation, but on the other hand, she doesn't at other points. And this is where Otto is wanting it at some points and not at others. The thing is, the two feed into each other in a way, and yet they depend on each other politically. And I would argue to an extent that when he is dismissed, well, spoilers for the book, what later happens with him weakens her position
Mm-hmm.
because she does count on him and he does count on her. Like, but the thing is, he thinks he's captain of the ship when really he's quartermaster. And
Well,
that's where,
so
yeah,
I think you are making some good points, and I just think that you see what, like, because we know what's somewhat to come next. I think you're just, you're you're burying the body before it stopped kicking. I
that's a saying.
I think it's inevitable that, no, I just came up with it. I'm kind of proud with it. Anyways, I'm sure there's variations of it, but you and I both know that body's about to die. It's just, I think we still got a little more time where you're throwing the dirt on it. But I mean, for the most part, in this case, the only disagreement is timing rather than anything that's actually been happening.
Well, no, I was just thinking like in terms of the way the two behave when on screen together.
Mm-hmm.
Like the power in the relationship has become much more equal, but also she's taking a lot of the uh like what I mean is the Lannisters and uh the Lannisters and Kristen Cole, for example, defer seemingly more to her at various points. And this point of deference is how power works. But on the other hand, he there are those who defer to him. So it's a bit of a weird thing where they're operating in concert with each other, but they're also like it's a weird relationship.
Yeah. Well, we've
But
we've gone round and round in circles on this, but I think we are kind of like at the point where we've beat this horse to death. I think we've
yeah,
covered a lot in regards to Otto, delved into a lot of other things. I think Otto's video is so far the most scattershot video we've done, but I know we got a lot more planned for the future.
yeah,
All right.
it's just hard not to talk about what's upcoming for him.
Mm-hmm. Well, with that all squared away, to everyone who stuck around to the end, thank you so much for listening. If you're interested in more content, make sure to check out my channel. We have other discussions as well, some more special ones coming up for the future. And obviously, this is going to be on your channel, so would you like to sign us off?
Yeah, sure. Don't forget to go check out Jasper's channel. As said, he's going to be hosting the Valarians, is going to be an interesting discussion. So do subscribe to his channel. Also, don't forget to smash that like button over here and that subscribe button as though you were, I guess, Balerion the Black tearing it a new one.